Leningrad, an old name that reminds us of a bygone era, and the name of a still existing place in Russia, one well worth discovering. Hello and welcome to 7 Facts. The Oblast of Leningrad is one of Russia's many federal subjects with a name that sounds all too familiar. It was named after the city of Leningrad, Russia's second largest city and former imperial capital. In 1991, the city restored its original name, St. Petersburg, but the oblast retained the name Leningrad. By the way, St. Petersburg is a federal city and is not part of this oblast. Leningrad is today one of the most developed and industrialized regions in the country and is home to 1.8 million people. Despite this, almost 70% of the oblast is still covered by forests, and there is an effort to conserve what's left of the natural landscapes. 50 nature reserves, sanctuaries, natural monuments and parks are crowded in an area that's slightly larger than Austria. You might think that nearby St. Petersburg steals all the spotlight and Leningrad is not really worth discovering. But you'd be wrong. Keep watching and I'll prove it. Have you ever heard of the medieval trade route between the Varangians and the Greeks? Or, to make this more obvious, between the Vikings and the Byzantines? This trade route was used to ship goods and slaves to and from Constantinople all the way up to Scandinavia. And this route passed through Leningrad. See, you're already learning a lot. And don't be surprised either. Back then, this region was inhabited mostly by Baltic Finns and Ilmen Slavs or Slovenes, so it wasn't a purely Slavic land. In fact, after the age of Vikings had passed, the borders between the Swedes and Novgorod, later Russia, moved back and forth over these lands. As a result, the ethnic majority of Leningrad changed several times throughout history. It was only after a 20-year-long war between Sweden and Russia that present-day Leningrad became permanently Russian. This happened under Tsar Peter the Great, who then established his new capital on these lands. Thanks to St. Petersburg, this area saw a lot of development and lots of common folks benefited from it. And those common folks? They weren't all Russian. In fact, the Russification of the population was complete only on the advent of the 20th century. If you guessed the Soviets had something to do with that, you guessed right. Areas around the border were to be cleansed of Finnic and other peoples who were considered politically unreliable by the new regime. Starting from 1929, the Soviet authorities carried out mass deportations of the Ingrian Finnish population of the oblast, which constituted the majority in many rural localities, to the east, replacing them with people from other parts of the Soviet Union. The capital of Leningrad Oblast is Gatchina, a city of less than 100,000. It lies on the outskirts of St. Petersburg, and just like its bigger brother, this city too has an imperial feel to it. That's because Gatchina used to be an imperial city itself, one of the Tsar's many residences. Starting from Catherine the Great, many of Russia's Tsars used Gatchina as their residence, developing its palaces and a town around them. Unfortunately, a lot of the splendor of those times is no longer. During World War II, Nazi Germany occupied the city, looted its palaces, and upon retreat, vandalized its parks and set fire to those palaces. After the Red Army retook Gatchina, it was thought that the damage was irreparable, and much of the city was rebuilt to the new Soviet standards. For 60 years, experts worked on restoring the city's imperial palace, and parts of it were indeed saved. Today, aside from its historic center, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, Gatchina is a great place to live. It remains one of the best Russian cities with regards to the quality of life. Now, about that palace. It's called the Great Gatchina Palace, and it was a favorite residence of the Russian imperial family. Originally a manor, it was bought by Catherine the Great in 1765 and gifted to Count Grigory Orlov, who reportedly organized the assassination of Tsar Peter III 3 years earlier, resulting in her becoming empress. A mere coincidence, I'm sure. Anyway, the Count replaced the manor with a 600-room palace, a huge English park, a zoo, and a horse farm. After his death, Catherine bought the place, thus transforming it into an imperial palace. Gatchina was modified throughout the centuries to meet the needs of new Tsars, but all throughout it retained its majesty and splendor. Once the empire fell, the palace was turned into a museum. Amazingly, in 1926, the palace was stripped of all unnecessary items such as furniture, bronze products and carpets to be sold to make money for the Soviet state. Then, as I said, the Germans ransacked it and burnt it down, and then the Soviets turned it back into a museum. Its restoration was very slow and tedious, and partial. Why? Well, take a look. This was the Chesme Gallery in 1877. And this was the same gallery in 2008. Reverting this back to its former glory is no easy task, and it ain't cheap either. But anyway, the parts that have been restored are open for visitation, and I bet it's worth every penny. Staraya Ladoga, a small, insignificant Russian village that's not even worth mentioning. Or is it? Founded in 753 AD, Ladoga was a prosperous trading outpost of a Scandinavian people who were called by the name of Rus. Intrigued? There's more. In 862 AD, a Varangian leader, Varangian is the Greek term for Viking, came to Ladoga and made it his capital. His name was Rurik, and he was the founder of the Rurik dynasty, the one that created the Kievan Rus and the Kingdom of Ruthenia, the Kingdom of Galicia, the Principality of Tver, the Grand Duchy of Vladimir, the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, the Grand Duchy of Moscow, the Novgorod Republic, and the Tsardom of Russia until the 17th century. You know Ivan IV, also known as the Terrible, the first Tsar of Russia? Yeah, he was a descendant of Rurik. Anyway, Kievan Rus was a mixture of Scandinavian, Finnic and Slavic people ruled initially by Norsemen, who then merged with the Slavs. Ukraine, Belarus and Russia claim this medieval state to be their cultural ancestor, and the terms Russia and Belarus derive from them. And all of it started here in Staraya Ladoga, which is why this place is regarded by some to be the first capital of Russia. That's pretty impressive for a small insignificant Russian village. A good chunk of Leningrad Oblast used to be, not that long ago, Finnish territory. Let me explain. In 1939, at the outbreak of World War II, the Soviet Union thought it would be wise to claim some territories. They demanded Finland to cede substantial border territories in exchange for land elsewhere. The reason was to secure Leningrad, which was too close to the border. The Finns obviously refused, so on November 30th, the Soviets invaded the country. Or at least they tried to. Finland put up a mighty fight, and in 3.5 months, nearly 170,000 Soviet soldiers perished. 26,000 Finns also died in the fightings. But Finland couldn't keep this up forever, so in the end they had to cede 8% of their lands, including the Karelian Isthmus. The entire Karelian population of the ceded areas, of about 422,000 people, was evacuated to other parts of Finland. Later, they were replaced with people from other parts of the Soviet Union. While the Soviets did win, it was a costly victory for a relatively small territory. Aside from the human casualties, the Soviet Union was also kicked out of the League of Nations and confirmed the negative Western opinions of the USSR. It also encouraged Adolf Hitler to believe that an attack on the communists would be easy and successful. As a result of the war I just mentioned, the city of Vyborg found itself to be in Russian territory. Now, truth be told, the city changed hands between Sweden, Russia and Finland many times in history. That of course is all in the past. Vyborg, or Vyborg today, remains one of the most beautiful cities in Russia and Northern Europe. The center of Vyborg preserves many examples of medieval Swedish and Finnish architecture. In addition to the city's castle, there are many other medieval churches, guildhouses, towers and other attractions. Hundreds of thousands of tourists visit Vyborg every year, which is no small feat for a city of less than 80,000. Please leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. Leave your comments downstairs and don't forget there's a Patreon page where you can support this channel. I hope to see you next time. Bye.